Cool. Perfect. I just like to tell people. Also, it's legally required of me.
Yeah.
But
No problem.
cool. So if you wouldn't mind, I know I got a little bit of background on you from, not to sound creepy, Google and my colleagues that actually did talk to you. But for the recording, could you just say your name, where you're from, what space in the education world that you fit into, how long you've been doing it?
Gotcha. My name is Esteban Clemens. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. Currently, I am the IB Program Director at North High School in Phoenix, Arizona. I've been in education for this my 14th year.
Cool.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so have you always been in the IB space?
No, I have not. No, 12 years I was a biology or science teacher at the school, and then I've been the IB director for the last 2 years.
So still high school, though, when
Still
you
high
did
school,
biology?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, same school.
Cool.
So.
Did you have a really big interest in science growing up?
Yeah, so when I did, I always did love science. I think probably junior high was the first time I really found out I really enjoyed that subject area, and it's always one I've done well at. And that's what I majored in college. So I decided to become a teacher. High school science was like, well, this is the natural fit for me. So yeah, so I've always done that, and then once my new position was just simply that was a spot that opened up. It doesn't open up very often, and so I decided to take on that challenge.
So this is a coordination kind of role as opposed to a direct classroom teaching
role? I am full in my current role. I am a full-time release, so I coordinate our IB program, which is a magnet program at our school. We have about 430 students in our program, grades 9 through 12. And so my job is recruitment, organization, planning, and then also working with the teachers within the program itself. So I don't directly teach any classes anymore, but I manage the program itself.
Gotcha.
So it makes it fun.
How did you make that decision to kind of go from
going to the classroom to being there? So it was really challenging. So prior to that, I'd been working in the IB program as a biology teacher. I worked for the IB as a grader, so I'm really involved, and really liked the organization as a whole. So when the coordinator spot opened, we had our prior director had been in the position for 16 years. And the previous director before her had been in the job for 15 years. So it was one of those things that people would go into and they just wouldn't leave. So when it opened up, I said, well, let's see if this opportunity will work. And it just happened to work out that way where it played out. And I was like, okay, let's try this. And also because of the area that we're in, our program began like in the 80s. When there weren't nearly as many charter schools or private schools, and so we had a really big draw. We had waiting lists and things like that, and over time with charter schools introduction and more alternative schools, our numbers have sort of waned. So part of my feeling was we can do some things to revigorate our program and bring people back. And so after talking with some colleagues that knew I was in the program, and I was like, what do you guys think? They're like, go for it and shoot. So I said, okay, let's try it. And it's been good. We've managed to sort of turn our numbers moving in the right direction over the last year or so.
And so in this role, I know you mentioned briefly, but do you work mostly with your administration, or do you also work with current teachers
I work with
still in the school?
Both. I do both a lot. So with my current teachers, I help them with their class. I manage our program like a small school within a large campus.
Okay.
Our program is hosted on our North High School is a comprehensive high school campus of about 2,900 students. Okay. And so our program is about 435 of those guys. So I manage everything that goes on with those students, and then I refer it to administration. With our administration, I work with all the building of the schedules and things like that. But with our teachers, it's, what do we need to do to get ready for exams? What resources can we supply? How can we do this? What do we need to do here? How can we make all these things work so that they're feeling supported? We can have the meetings that we need to. So it's a mix. So it's a quasi-admin role, quasi-teacher role, quasi-weirdness everywhere.
Quasi-liaison.
Yeah, quasi-liaison, quasi-parent liaison, and then recruiter, because our district is unique. We are a high school only district. Okay. So we have, Phoenix Union has 17 or 14 comprehensive high schools, but we have 7 elementary school districts that feed into our one large high school district. So going to each elementary district and talking to their junior highs and recruiting students from there to come to our program is a lot of our job, because there is no direct pathway to our program. So that makes it a little fun, but it makes it interesting.
So it's essentially, just so I get my head in the right spot, it's essentially like an honors college within a larger college.
Correct. Yeah, we have exactly. We have an application process, and there's an interview process for the kids and things like that. So they come and show that they're interested in the program and why they want to be there. So
how does that interview process work? Is it you?
It is.
Teacher? Is it you?
So it has been it's been modified. So we used to do just a paper interview or paper screening, and I found that I thought we were missing kids that way. So we have an initial paper screening, but anyone who turns in their paperwork is guaranteed an interview with me. And so me and their parents, and then we meet together. We have about a 30-minute interview about what is it they want, why do they want to be here, what are their subjects, what are their strengths. We review some of their old material, like, hey, well, let's look at your grades, because what we found is there's a lot of schools in our area where there's a high teacher turnover rate, and so you may have a student who has grades that aren't great, and like, why I had three math teachers this year. So we have that conversation, sort of see what's out there, and then what are the expectations for the program, and is this going to work for us? And we have a really high acceptance rate. I tell students, if you really want to do this, we'll help you out. But you got to commit like up front that you want to do it. So we normally have those. Occasionally, I'll bring in our counselor. If there's something that's on the ropes or something we're not sure about, but we do our best to get every kid in the program. If they're willing to put the time and effort in and bring the letters of recommendation, everything else, we really do our best to try to bring them in and support them.
Sorry, I was about to ask you that. I'm glad you opened that door. The letters of recommendation. So is that from, most of the time, do you recruit from junior high into high school only? Is there any movement once you're in a high school?
We do. So we do recruit. I recruit mainly from junior high and high school. Yeah. We will allow students within the program itself, if they're a freshman going to be a sophomore being a junior in our campus, they can transfer in. And we do have several of our sister schools who have students who want to transfer in later on. As long as it's in those first years, it's fine, because it's sort of the scaffolding for the main part of the program. Right. Junior and senior, the program doesn't really have the flexibility for, but if it's other times, we allow them to come in, transfer and work in the program itself, and then we do a modified interview for them, but it's still the same thing, like, why do you want to come here, why are you leaving your current school? And occasionally we have students from other private schools. This last year we had 10 students from private schools who could no longer afford to attend those, and they were trying to decide where they're going to go now, and so we look to try to bring those guys in. And then even occasionally on our campus itself, we'll have students who maybe the entire program doesn't really match what they want to do, but they're really interested in continuing on their Spanish education or art education or something else. And so then they'll come and interview with me about doing a partial work in the program. So they may do 1 or 2 classes, and we support that as well.
Gotcha.
So we try to be as inclusive as possible for students.
So many questions. Is the recommendation process, is that really similar to how college recommendations are, essentially? Like within those junior high teachers, they might still have to know how to write those? Yeah, so what I do is whenever we do their recommendation, we put it out, we try to get it back digitally if we can, because some of them don't, they'll send it in paper. We review them all, and most of the time what I'm looking for is what does the teacher see, that makes the student, because there's some that, if you've done Common App or anything else, there's sometimes it's like you just get, kid's great, kid's happy, and you're like, well, that's not really helpful. So, yeah, exactly. So we ask for some specific things like how do they deal with it? How have they dealt with adversity in class? What's their maturity like? What are the things they're going to be able to work? And those are the parts that I like to talk about with them, because the teacher's like, hey, they get frustrated really fast, and we have those conversations, and we use that really. And sort of overlay that with the essay they write for why they want to be part of the program. It's not. We don't ask them why they want to be part, because they just all say, I want to be part. It sounds challenging, but we ask them what do they hope to gain from this program, and how do they intend to sort of be able to look at the world internationally, with a global perspective, and what do they think this is going to allow them to do. And we look at those together and sort of combine, like, what type of profile are we getting from the student, where are their challenges at. Some students have a hard time, their home life may not be great, some students may have a great home life, but they struggle when they're challenged or there's adversity. So we try to get an idea there, and that's part of when we do their entrance interview is I customize the questions a little bit to sort of hit some of those points, because I want them to know, like, okay, so how do you handle things? Like and I've had some that's like, students really unorganized. So it's like, okay, well, what are we going to do? Like, you were in junior high, you had 6 classes, and your teacher said your backpack looked like a hurricane. So we have I'm going to put you in our support class first semester to make sure we have your organization down, and what are we going to do to make sure that you can, build these skills, or, you're really organized, but you don't
do this, or you're sick. So we try to have those conversations so they know up front what their teachers are saying to them. And so it works out well 95% of the time. There's occasionally that we get, letters of rec that aren't great, but most of the kids really go and try to find someone who gives them, a teacher that is supportive. And then there are times where there's several schools we've built some pretty good partnerships with, where I can call the school and talk to the teacher and say, hey, can you give me a heads up about this kid?
Yeah. So it seems like that is a little bit more almost like an evaluation than a recommendation.
There is
kind of a mix.
It's a kind of a mix from them. Like because we used to just do straight recommendations, and I found that those weren't uber useful. Yeah, they were, because it's just like, the kid comes over, hey, can you write me a letter of recommendation? Oh, here's the form that you need to fill out. It's like, yes, they're a great student. Yes, they'll be great for your program. Check 4, 4, 4 here. And those were just getting papers in, so it became like just an exercise of, can you bring back all the papers to me, and then you can get in the program. Like that's what it wasn't what we were looking for. Because what I found one of the first year I took over was students who academically looked very strong on paper did not always necessarily translate into success in the program over the course of 4 years. There were some students who had very strong academics, and then when it came down to their follow-through or some other things, it wasn't there. At the flip side, we had students who were not accepted to the program initially because maybe there were some weaker academic points, like their standardized test scores or something else, managed to get in 1 or 2 classes or petition to come in their sophomore year, and they did very well going out. So we were missing kids, and that's where it led me to go. We're missing kids along the way. Our previous system may have worked, but this is not working with our current population. So we need to do a little better job of evaluating and seeing like how much drive do they have. Just the bright kid just is not automatically going to be our best student out there.
Right.
So
I guess from that kind of angle, obviously teachers are probably more well acquainted with AP than they are IB. What do you think are the things that new teachers who might not be as well acquainted with what it is should know about the program, especially if they're considering? Yeah,
if you're looking at a school, so I would say the biggest thing about IB is more of a philosophy. It's advanced classes, but they're all interconnected, and I think that's the part that's cool. We make kids strive and be pushed harder in things they wouldn't necessarily choose on their own. So if I'm an AP student and I'm great in English, then I might take AP Lit, but I don't really like math, so I'm not going to take AP Calc. Like that's just not going to happen. Well, in the IB program, in the diploma program, so junior or 11th and 12th grade, we require them to do 6 courses, and so they have to do a language, they have to do a primary language, normally English, a foreign language, they have to do a history, they have to do a science, and they get a choice. So like, even if you're not super strong in English, like you're gonna need to. So with that, and then we really focus on interconnectedness within the program itself. So the teachers do a lot of communicating, the subjects overlap some, so you get a little more sort of well-rounded sort of view of the world. And it does that push where you don't have to be like, well, yeah, we're not great in this, but I'm still gonna have to try it, so be challenged at it. Which I think is a cool thing to do. Again, depending on the university, you can still get college credit, so there's still some of those aspects in there as well. And most of the universities, if they acknowledge AP for credit, they acknowledge IB as well. It's just a little more digging has to go in. So I think those are the big things that we do that make our program a little more interesting than maybe just like an AP program, because we are going to say, hey, you got to do the whole thing. And then at the lower levels, at the junior high level and at the primary schools level, because there are IB programs there as well. It is, again, looking at the international mindedness and the interconnectedness of discipline. So, and I think that's something that in the United States we really lack. We don't hear, we think about us, and we don't think about like global implications and large. So everything in the IB is like, okay, we got to think beyond just us here. You got to think globally. How is this affecting? What are the topics that are of global importance? And I think that's where, when they start young, I think it comes out by the end of their senior year, they have a little more worldly perspective about everything that's going on. It's not just simply like a American-centric view about everything.
So ethnocentric.
Yeah, so.
Yes. So it feels like that kind of perspective is really built through social studies classes, at the very level, the lower level of education. Do you ever have conversations with those kinds of teachers
to
kind of prepare that mindset?
Yeah, so we do some of that interconnectedness. Social studies is the one that jumps to mind where we can simply go like, hey, here, we're going to do this. But IB does have a set of philosophies on how we look and priorities that every school, when you apply to be an IB school, it sort of accepts these as part of your mission and vision. And part of it's the global mindedness, and it's challenging. There's a list of them, but all those things sort of come into play, and it's expected within an IB school that you're looking at these interconnectedness. So we may talk about global warming. So how does this relate within your science class? But also what is the effect on this in your history class or literature, or when we're talking about how did all these things come to be, and why are they all important, and why really does this? At the end of the day, it's like, why does this matter at all? Like why do you have to study this? And so we do a lot. There's actually in the higher level courses, we have a theory of knowledge class, which is like a philosophy 101 class, and we spend that class is almost solely dedicated to interconnecting the students to like disciplines and how do we know things, epistemology.
Yeah.
So it makes for a cool sort of experience for the students, but we do have those conversations, and some topics we focus on in our school, histories of the Americas to meet our state standards, but internationally there are different sort of pathways that a history class can go, so there's a lot of flexibility within the IB program where, if you're in Asia Pacific, there's different history routes the instructor can go to, so it makes it culturally relevant to the students. So when we assess these things on an international scale, it's not everyone learned about America, like that's just not how that's going to work.
Right.
So it's sort of can be tailored more towards their specific area that they're at and the interest of the students there. As well as we do several research papers throughout the program, and it's that students driven, and they get to decide and they choose an advisor, but it's really what topic are they interested in. So we sort of help facilitate those things as well with a global perspective, like, but what do you want to do in this? And we really force them to go and say, hey, here, that's great, you're doing it, but it's not just a research paper, like you got to synthesize some things and pull some stuff together from outside sources and other ideas. So.
Yeah. So it seems like with this particular group of kids, there's probably not a huge wide array of behavioral issues, but I'm going to ask about them anyway.
No, there are often not, but there still are. There are a lot of times people believe, and we get into the discussion at the school about, oh, there's all these kids, you have the IB kids, you're lucky, these are the easy kids to deal with. And to some extent, these are some of the students who are more academically driven. The carrot of academics and grades does motivate them more than maybe a general student. At the same time, though, they also tend to be the students who sometimes the ethics portion will fall to the wayside, and that's one thing that we discuss often is, we go over here, it's like, what is ethical, what's not. It's part of our policy here, because we do have occasions where students will go in and, make unethical decisions because they're so concerned about the grade. That's the driving force. How I get there, I'm not so concerned about. And then, honestly, we're in a digital age, and we do get bullying. We get more cyberbullying than I thought was possible. I took over the job, just the students who, because it's such there's a very, with the current ranking of class grades, and we have, you're either number one or you're not, like, to get to that spot can cause a lot of people to forsake the, friendship or the kind word to try to make sure that you are in a dog-eat-dog world, if you will. So we try to move away from that, and it's hard. It's a challenge, but I think some of the other parts, discipline is not so much. Attendance can be, but oftentimes we run into the issue of a lot of the IB students have heard about the program either from recruitment but their parents have been involved in some aspect, and even when we interview, it's because their parents must come and interview with them. And when they come through and they have that conversation, I get to know the parents, but oftentimes the parents are very involved. And so then we have sometimes that can be challenging as well, where parents will probably overstep their bounds in terms of what they can do, and why, questioning why grades are a particular way, or calling in students sick when they haven't done their work, or so we get a lot of weird things like that, more so than our other students. We are an inner city school, so there's not as much parental involvement as we'd like, but this group of parents tends to be particularly involved.
Right. Jeez. How do you kind of mitigate that over involvement?
Yeah,
in a good way.
In a good way. No, yeah, because it is a mix. You want to. So I tell parents that I always like to refer to my teachers first. I'm like, have you made contact with the instructor? And then I always tell my instructors, if you have a parent and you feel a little aggressive, you feel you're not quite sure, then always please involve me on the email strand, and then I will handle parents who are sort of maybe overstepping their bounds, or I'll bring the parents in and say, let's have a conversation first about what's happening, what's going on, where are the concerns, and so oftentimes I'll meet before, if there's an ongoing issue, I'll meet with the teacher, I'll meet with the student, I'll meet with the parent, and then we'll facilitate a conversation. Oftentimes there's a miscommunication, or once I do a little digging, we'll find out where the hang-up is. We try to find where we're at. Most of the times we can meet a pretty healthy resolution without too much bickering. But occasionally there are parents who just simply do not like the decision that's made, or how a grade was come about. And we'll have that conversation. And then sometimes we look at it, and we'll have a discussion within our team about, okay, going forward, is this really what the best we want to do, or we need to clean up how we're doing because there was confusion here, and we need to make that a little bit clearer policy. But I tell my teachers, like, I will be the buffer between you and the parent, especially with the parents being overly aggressive.
Yeah.
Because there are some parents who are just go, and we want to support them and their students, and there are some times when simply maybe this isn't the best fit, and maybe we should go our separate ways, because what we have to do here for our program requirements is not matching what you think we need to do, and we're at an impasse here, and I can't come any farther and still be an IB school, or an IB program. So, and you don't want to come any farther, so we got to figure out how to bridge that gap, or we have to just go our separate ways.
Yeah.
So,
how do you think that your philosophy or your approaches to dealing with parents have changed between the two roles? I mean, obviously.
Oh yeah, as a teacher, it's very different.
Is different.
I think the biggest thing is a lot of times parents just want to be heard, and when you're in the classroom, that's not that's not my goal. I don't necessarily want to sit here and just have you vent to me for 20 minutes about why you don't like what I'm doing, because it becomes very personal as a teacher, because you're effectively, if I'm talking to you, you're criticizing me directly about something that's done. And I have my rationale and reason about why we've done particular things. As a director, I get to be removed, I get to meet with the teacher, I get to see what they're at, and I get to sit here and listen and speak with the parent about, tell me everything you want to tell me, and I let them get all that stuff off their chest. And then I say, okay, let's look at what it is, whether that's the grades, whether that's the the syllabus for the course, whether that's the tests that the kid took, and say, okay, let's lay all this out and look and see where was our hang up at, or why don't you like the policy, and then have that conversation. But I think one of the big things is letting them give whatever they want to give first, and I just let the parents go, and then once they're done, then it's like, okay, now we can continue on because you've had your say, you've got to get everything off your chest. And normally the parents are much calmer then, and sometimes that's all they wanted. Sometimes there's frustration because maybe they emailed the teacher or they called the teacher and the teacher hasn't gotten back to them in a couple of days, and now they're frustrated, and now their kid is telling them one thing. And so sometimes it's just like they want someone to sit and talk to. That's familiar with the situation, because some parents will go, I'm just going to talk to the principal. Well, the principal's sort of in our situation like 2 or 3 times removed from the classroom, so the principal will have no clue. Because our program is much smaller, I have copies of all their syllabus. I know what they're supposed to be teaching. I know what the curriculums are, so I can speak a little bit cleaner, so I can have that conversation with the parents that says, hey, I know what you think they should be learning, but here's really what they're doing. Here's why they did whatever they did. I've already met with the teacher. I've looked over the lesson plan. I can have this conversation. And because I do my job full time, I can give the parents the time that they need. I'm not limited to, I can give you 15 minutes next Tuesday. I can be like, you want to meet tomorrow? Okay, let's meet tomorrow. What time works for you? You want to come in at 2:45? We can come in, we can come give you 30 minutes at 2:45. Great, let's sit here and have that out. And then that sort of brings everyone's level down, so it keeps everyone a little bit happier along the way. Yeah.
That's what we all want.
Yeah,
Everybody
sometimes.
happier.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so I know we talked a lot about your current role, but I am still interested in the biology aspect and everything from your first few years.
Yeah, so when I first started, I originally went to college. I was like, I'm going to go to med school. This sounds great. But I'd always enjoyed teaching. I had taught some lessons for 3 or 4 years before. I taught some lessons through college, and so during college, I needed an extra class. Took an intro to education class, and I was like, I could probably do this. And I decided and it was one of those things like, this is probably more of my calling. Like, medicine's cool, biology's cool, but I could do biology and still teach. Mm-hmm. So I managed to go through, got my degree, and then I'm hired at the same school where I graduated from, and that I continue to work at now. I got in the science, student taught there, got in there in the science department, and I've taught, I think, like 6 or 7 different science courses. And each year has just been sort of fun to go, like, what are we doing? I've taught freshmen through seniors, and I think each time I've gone through and taught a new subject there, or a subject, it's been like, okay, well, what can we do to make this class engaging and interesting? Because by the time students reach 9th grade, they have the mindset either I'm good at science or I'm not good at science. Yeah. And so there is, in their mind, it's like, okay, well, I'm not good. And so now I'm just trying to struggle through this course, or like I'm really good. So you're just trying to bring those two things together. In addition to have a class that's not, we're going to stand here and I'm going to talk to you for the next 50 minutes. So like, how do you make this interactive?
So for those kids who are like, I just suck at science, myself being one of those those people, how do you do that? How do you, I mean, obviously you can't just convince them, you're wrong, you're not bad at science.
Yeah, no,
but
you
like,
can't.
how to get them involved.
Yeah, so I think one of the key things is how do you set up your classroom that there can be success, and how do you set up the classroom where everyone needs to be engaged in one way, shape, or form. So from my first year, my class has always been set in groups, so it's always been groups of 4. We've always had whiteboards out on the table, and almost everything that we do in class is designed around, you're going to get the points by having tried it, and then we're going to talk about what the right answers were. So I always tell kids, like, what I need you to do is I need you to try this at home, or during class. And then we're going to talk about it during class. So you're going to get all the points. So I try to remove the grade fear, like, did you try it? Cool. We're going to give you all the points for trying it. Let's just call that good. You tried it, 100%. So let's not worry about that. Next 2 days, we're going to talk about it. So we want to find out what you knew, what you didn't know, and if you didn't know it, let's figure out how to make sure that this sticks a little bit better. And we do that normally by group work, by presentations, and a variety of other ways, so that students were like, okay. And I told them, like, if you're bad, if you're not good at tests, because there's kids like, I'm not good at tests. I'm like, okay, great. Then what we'll do is when we take the test, once we're done with the test, okay, whatever you got wrong, you have 2 weeks. You can come in and fix them. Show me where you got the work from. Like, use your notes, use all this stuff. You can fix it, I'll give you the points back. So there's not, so let's remove the fear of the grade and get back into, like, actually, what are you trying to learn and what are we trying to get? I think, and once we sort of do that, it does take for some kids like the first 9 weeks or so to get that sort of comfort level. Then they're willing to put it out there, because if they even if they get it wrong, or within my group, because oftentimes they're less fearful. I found that kids were less fearful to be wrong in front of their peer than they were in front of me. So if we're going to talk about the homework assignment, like, this group, group A, you guys are going to do question 1. So everyone gets out question 1. They can talk within themselves, come up with a unified answer, put it on their board, and then as a group they can present it. They can decide how they want to present, and then they can sort of teach that idea to the class itself. So there, it's like, it's not just you. It's not asking you to stand up in front of the board and write your one answer that may or may not be right. It's like within the communal, like your guys' communal group, there's you. And then when we do labs and things like that, then same thing, like, let's, as a group, you guys design the lab. As a group, you guys figure out how you're going to do this. As a group, you guys get to present your results. And I used to say, like, failure is always an option, and that's good. Like, we want to make sure that if you fail, then you don't have to redo the lab. You just need to go, okay, well, what do you, after we talk about where do you find that things maybe went wrong at? Like, okay, let's talk about that. So trying to sort of remove that, that stigmatism that comes along with failure. I didn't do it right the first time, so now I'm no good. And we do that. And once we've done that, when I was teaching, I would teach our Bio 5-6, which is our 3rd year biology class. So there were some kids that I would have their sophomore year and then their senior year. And so I would sort of be able to watch them over those 2 courses. Get that. So by the time they were seniors, it was no problem, and they would step out. And I often get students come back and say, "Oh, I went to ASU, and took biology 181, and we learned everything in those first 2 years in your class, so it was super easy. I'm like, good. I was like, did you know everything in the lab? Did you know how to write a lab? They're like, yeah, we know how to do all that stuff. I'm like, and it wasn't stressful anymore? They're like, no, it's fine. So it's fun. And so occasionally you get those. I have one student who I just emailed me the other day, and she's like, just finished up at the community college, and she's now going to issue, and her mom's like, and she was never my strongest student. And like, she knew that, I knew that, and when her mom told me that she was a biology major, I was like, really? Taylor decided to be a biology major? And she's like, yeah. And so now then Taylor sends me an email. She goes, I'm going to maybe teach high school science. And I was like, she was maybe junior high. I don't know if I want to do high school. I was like, never in a million years would I have suspected that. But I was like, that's good. And she just said, like, the comfort level that I learned in the classes, made it okay for me to continue on and try this. And I found I really liked it versus before. Even graduate high school, she was like, I'm not a big fan, but she sort of found a niche over time.
So I guess, when you do give, I don't know, points for trying, I guess, which is a great way to create a safety net and make people feel comfortable for learning. How does that relate to actually achieving the learning standards with science, though? Yeah, so what we would do is, so oftentimes the pattern I would have would be, here's an assignment, reference it in the book here's the area, and I never gave questions out of the book because they were never any good, because then I just look it up in the book and I can write it down. There's no learning there. So I would normally take a concept and I would give some sort of like, so a normal assignment would be like, it'd be 4 questions, 5 questions, but it'd be like an abstract idea about the concept. I'm like, and normally freshman or sophomore year, I would say like your response needs to be like 3 to 4 sentences long. I gave them like the parameters of what they needed, how they need to respond to it. And I say, you need to come up with these answers. Now, the way I would do it is like, they'd come into class and like, show me your work. If they did it, I would stamp it. If they didn't do it, I'd say, okay, well, we're going to be talking about the next 2 days, so your job to fill in the answers along the way. So then we would go through, and we would always go through every question on the paper as a group. So groups would present, the other group, the class would be able to answer questions, and then I would also be sort of, if there was something wrong, I'd be like, hey, so did you guys look at this? Did we consider this? Till we basically had vetted out a standard answer. And I was like, okay, well, with that being said, let's look at the board. Here's what we should have something approximate to. Everyone should have that down on your paper at this point in time. So if you got that or something great to, just put a plus and just add it to it because you already got it. If you were completely off base, there's an extra paper up there if you want to, or jot some notes down, but attach it to it, and that's your responsibility to hold on to those. And we would always sort of do that through an entire unit. So by the time we got to the unit test, everything is in there. It's like we have all the correct answers, all the correct notes here. So how are we going? And then we talk about how do we study, how do we use those things. And I would always tell parents, I'd say, listen, if they don't get it right, it's like, why didn't they get it right? It's like, well, does their paper, were they engaged in their learning? And I would say, we went over every question in class. They had the right answer. Now, if they didn't write anything down, that's a different conversation we need to have about what were you doing the last. We talked about these 5 problems for 2 days, and you wrote nothing down. Like, so what were you doing during class? Well, I wasn't doing anything. Well, then that's sort of your concern, and that's a different problem than, oh, you didn't teach it. I'm like, well, we were working as a group, so we did that. So that allowed me also to really narrow down what the standards they were, because there were some times that we would do a particular topic, and we would, the students would have a pretty good grasp. Like that third year class would have some things where they had it remembered from sophomore or junior year, and they had a really solid grasp. So when we went to do the presentations, they'd present, boom, right on topic. You guys present, boom, right on topic. We could be done in half the time frame. We could be moving forward. Versus, we're having some real problems here as a group. Let's put that extra time in right there. So it allowed me to make the assessment of what was going on in the course right up front, instead of waiting to do like, hey, we're going to do a quiz, and I have to wait to get all the quizzes back, and then I have to grade all the quizzes, and then go, oh, they didn't do well. Now I have to go like that. That was never really effective for me. And then the same thing I would do was when we graded exams in class. They graded their peers' exams, and the reason we did that was because I said, here, we're going to put the answer key up here, and especially like on free response, I would make a key on here's where I'm giving points for. And they would have to go and read their peer stuff, and they would have to put it in quotes and what letter they gave a point for. So they would be able to go and get in the process of read and see like,
Are they being clear in communication, or what are the points here? And then I always go and spot check, but it would also allow much faster feedback. So if we took a test today and everyone took it, we could grade it tomorrow and you could have it back to look at the following day. Instead of, now I have 150 exams to grade, how long will this take me to do? Like, well, if it comes back 2 weeks later, that hasn't helped anyone in the process. Because now we've moved on, you've forgotten about it. Here it's like, yep, took it today, graded tomorrow, and now we can have that conversation. Okay, now let's have the conversation now. Okay, do we need to reteach anything? Do we need to do any other work? Cool, we can do that over the next few days, and then we can move on.
Yeah. Have you seen any social problems come out of that, of grading each other's papers?
There were, so everyone, that was the biggest concern, and one of the hardest points to sell with some of my colleagues was like, well, what about this? And I said, well, so when I have the conversations with the students, we talk about the ethics, and I said, here's how it works. I said, here's the perspective. I was like, you're going to have this paper, multiple choice is easy. I was like, the expectation is you have to put your name that you're the one who graded them. I was like, now, I tell them, like, here's the deal. If I go through and regrade a paper that you graded, and there's a lot of mistakes, I was like, I give you one pass. And the second time, I was like, then you and I will have a conversation, and I'm going to deduct points from you. Like, you're going to lose points overall for not actively participating, because I gave them, like, 10 points or something to help to grade test. So, like, you will lose some of your points here for not actively participating. And I was like, number two, if you're grading your friend's test, I was like, and you decide not to mark things down again, if it comes down, first time is a pass, then there's a penalty that's going to come upon you. And if you've been penalized twice, then we'll change. You'll grade your own test with me during another time. So there was sort of an accountability point on them. And then also, I always tell the students, once you get your exam back, if you feel like something got graded wrong, and maybe I didn't catch it, you're always welcome to bring it up to me, and we can look, and I'll make a final ruling. And sometimes that occurs. They're kids, so sometimes they make mistakes. You're right. They should have given you a point here. I see what you're saying. Mark it. Cool. Let me go on the computer, change it. No problem. And so, just having that sort of flexibility with them and the openness to be like, I will have a conversation about any of it, and not be like, this is set in stone, really prevented over my 12 years in the classroom. I think I had one student who I had to basically say, you can no longer grade someone else's work. Everyone else, like, there were kids who got dinged here and there. There were some kids that were better graders than not. But overall, it was a pretty effective way to do things. And the kids enjoyed it. They got to see what was happening. They got to see their work. They got to see their peers work. And then, they always sort of joke, like, when they got done, like, oh, I didn't do well. Or, like, you get that collective moment. And I told them, like, if you're really that concerned about your grade right there, then you can come in with me, we can sit here and grade it, but it's just going to be longer. It's going to be slower for you to get that done.
Did it actually save you time?
Well, it did for me. Well, it did for me. I mean, just because even if they weren't the best graders, I could go through and I could see the big marks and see what the key points are, or I knew where questions were that there were going to be problems at. Like, multiple choice is always easy. I mean, it was like, okay, I can skim over. Like, most of them could figure out A, B, C, or D without too much issues. Free responses, I would glance over and see, like, well, this is normally where the majority of the points would be in these first three, and so I would glance and see. But I would be able to skim over within a day after I got them all graded. They grade them in class. I could skim over that night and be pretty effective about where we were. And then there were always kids I would identify as, this kid maybe isn't as strong, and I could go back and make marks, but I could have those ready to go the next day to turn back out. So it went before, and when I was grading tests on my own, like when I first started, I would probably say I would be like a week before I could get tests back, just because it was 30 kids per class, and you're reading and you're going multiple choice, free response, okay, done, next one, and it just became monotonous. So,
right. Yeah. And this also adds another layer of learning. Okay, so I have a couple more questions.
Yeah, no,
but I of course want to get you back to the floor.
Oh no, it's a little intense on it right now, so I'm all good.
Yeah. This is way more fun, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So this is like a very basic question, but were there any, among all of the different science classes that you've taught, were there any experiments or certain like pieces that you really liked teaching or were a class favorite?
There were, so in my upper division course, I think one of the things I liked to do the most was let them design. Like, we would be like, we would do cellular respiration. I would be, okay, so here's the stipulations. You need to do something with cellular respiration, and you get to sort of design the lab on how you want to do it. Here's the things we have. We have yeast, we have these sensors, we have this. So I would bring out like a host of stuff, and I'd be like, we're going to spend today just letting you guys play and figure out like what works and what doesn't work, and then we'll do the next 2 days we'll do like an actual lab. Because just watching some of their minds, like how they do, and some of the things, it was funny because so many of them are used to cookbook labs where it's like, okay, here's the directions, I do this, this. We're like, do it on your own. You'd have kids who are like, okay. So you'd ask them like, well, I'm going to use yeast. Okay, well, do you have any clue how much yeast you need or how much water? Like, no clue at all.
Yeah.
So I have kids who would do experiments that would be completely outlandish, like take a beaker and fill it halfway with sugar and then like water and then dump the yeast, and you're like, well, let's see how that plays out. And then they look over and the whole thing's bubbling over.
Yeah.
Or like put nothing in. So I always told them like, part of this is you learning what you can do and what you can't do. And it's not always my job to go and do it. We would do gel electrophoresis where we would run like banana DNA or their cheeks DNA. And they would be like, well, how do I? I'm like, well, we have some directions. Like, here's some protocols that we should use, but you're going to decide what you want to do, how you want to do it within these parameters. And give them that freedom was always really fun to watch what they did. Sophomores were much harder to do that with because they would go and go all over the place. One of the first ones we do with them was this is osmosis lab, and we'd give them potatoes. And I'd say, okay, well, here's the requirement. You need 5 different trials, and each trial needs 5 experiments. And I would have like potatoes out. So like, here's some knives, here's some cutting boards. And so some kids whack the potato into like big, huge, ugly chunks. Others like making these tiny little dice. So after we do their first trial, I'm like, okay, let's talk about things that we saw. Like, would your potato even consistent in size? Mm-hmm. No. Think that may have had an effect on what's going on? Well, maybe. Like, okay. So what could we do? And so when we have this conversation and this group conversation, everyone sort of comes up with like, oh, well, if I had done that, that probably would have helped out a lot. So once we had this big sort of group think, and then we list all the things that maybe went wrong this time around, it's like, okay, so if we do this again, what should you do differently this time? Because we're going to do it again. And so then without having to give them directions, they've sort of established what should they have done, or what should be clearer examples of what's happening. Now they're going to do the lab again, and then then they'd be like, oh, these results came out much better. I'm like, it's not your fault that you didn't necessarily know what to do. You were just sort of like, but we got to look at how are you thinking about the process? Like, did you think about how to control these things? And, building that was, because, the reality is, I tell kids, I'm like, probably most of you will forget what osmosis is after high school. Like, you're going to once you're done, it's probably not going to affect you on a daily basis. So, but if you can at least be able to look at a problem ahead of time and like come up with some reasonable solutions, like that's a better life skill. Mm-hmm. And so that was with a lot of the kids, especially with my regular students, like where I could get them to buy in a little bit more to the science is like we're looking at how you think and how to help you get through and make some more solid choices what you're doing, And it's like, yeah, and I would also tell in class, like, I'm giving you knives. Like, you have these at home. Like, so I shouldn't have to give you a whole list of rules, like don't cut each other, don't poke each other. Like you go to your kitchen, you use a knife. I don't need because I would have some of my colleagues, I can't believe you let them have knives. I'm like, they're 15, 16 years old. They go home, they make sandwiches. Like they probably have cut a piece of meat before. Like this shouldn't be like we're so scared to do anything in the classroom. Like, okay, just treat them like adults, make sure the expectation's there, and then, if there's a problem, then you handle it. So. But I always love to sort of see them do their own things. And then there were, some of the more technical labs, like doing the gel electrophoresis, doing with our seniors, doing the glow-in-the-dark bacteria with those are always like, these are really cool, I'm like, yeah, they're cool, like, but, how much do we keep with it? And then always trying to figure out ways to do it on a budget. That was always the other fun part.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question. If you are essentially doing labs twice,
yeah,
how does that affect?
So that's where you get real creative about what you're using for the lab. Like I got really good at if we were going to do labs like that, we were doing twice. Then they were very cheap labs to do. So, what does a 10-pound bag of potatoes cost? Okay, cost $1 or $2. Like,
Yeah.
what is a 10-pound bag of sugar, and a 10-pound bag of salt and a gallon of vinegar? These are the things that we have out here, guys. Like, so, and I would tell them, like, if you want to bring something else in, get clearance with me, and I'll let you bring it in for your experiment. If you want to bring something different, and so I'd have kids bring in like Coke or milk or things like that. I'm like, okay, well, you can do it for yours, if you want to bring those stuff in, but here's what we have for the class for everyone. And so when I did that, it became real easy to do some of those things. Some of the more expensive ones, there was much more protocol. Like, if we're doing the genetic engineering ones, those ones are because you have to order the kits. And so those were much more specific on how we're handling those.
Right.
But those also come in directions. But those were often like, this is to look at what we've done in actual practice. So we've already discussed this concept and this theory. Let's see it in practice here versus let's see what you can do on your own. So there were two different types of labs that existed. There were the ones where you're designing, we were about your methodology and practice, and then there was okay, we've learned about the subject, let's see it in action here.
Yeah.
So.
Gotcha. Basic question. Do you typically arrange your classrooms within lab partners or lab groups, or?
I would normally arrange them. Yeah, I would let them go. Normally I would let them do lab partners. Like, I would start the year off, just for comfort, I would let everyone choose their spot. There's 4 people per seat, and that was initial, and I would normally every quarter is guaranteed I would change, and we would change more often if it was something that we needed to manage the class setting.
Change groups?
Yeah, change groups, yeah.
Okay.
So there were times where, like, sometimes we'd go a full quarter and they would sit with the same people because everything was working fine in the class, and that just worked out. And then we would switch because you need to work with other people. You need to practice working with others. If there were sometimes issues, we would change every 3 weeks. So, like, we have a couple kids that don't get along, or this group is very ineffective. We're going to struggle through for 3 weeks, then we're going to swap everyone up again. So I used class groups as a way to manage the class when need be. If not, it was just a simple way to have the conversation. And then, again, allowing it, at least at the beginning, on them to self-select who their groups were, at least give them some comfort. While they got to know me, they may be in the class with someone else that they already know. So it was a comfort thing for them at the beginning, because little weird, little quirky. I would have some different rules that they may not have in other classes that I was okay, well, let's get used to each other. So as we established those protocols, we tried to make everything else as easy as possible. So
what are those rules that are?
So there was I always had a plush. It was a plush yeast guy. So he's a little yeast. And he was called the yeast of yakking, and the rule was, like, we'd talk in classes, unless you're holding the yeast of yakking, you don't get to speak. So here, and then I'd be like, okay, you got the yeast, and so now you're talking, okay, throw it over to table 4. So we throw it, so trying to get some of those things down, because the kids are like, you caught it, he's yours, you have to talk now. So we'd make some of those things. Turning in things or getting work stamped was sometimes really awkward for them, because I had realized, like, hey, homework is due up here, first 3 minutes of class. So bell rings, timer goes off. You have 3 minutes from that timer goes off. It needs to be in the basket. And so inevitably there's a kid who the timer goes off. They're running up. I'm like, nope, timer went off. You weren't done. So hold back, and you're going to have to fill it out later on. And there's that's not fair. I'm like, no, you had 24 hours to get it ready, and you didn't. Because sometimes they're trying to copy or just write something down so they get the point. So, no, we established that. And then sometimes it's just the conversations that we have in class, because there's times where, life occurred outside, so we'd have to have a conversation about something else. And they were always like, well, what about, like, well, we're going to pause here. And I always just, I'm like, we're going to speak like you're young adults. Let's speak like young adults. And if you have a question and you don't know how to ask it correctly, then ask it the way you know how to ask it. So that would come up a lot when we did reproduction. There would be times where it's like, I'm like, yeah, we it's called a penis. It's okay. You can say the word penis in here. And they would just say, especially sophomores, they get so freaked out by that. But some of them couldn't, so they would just use slang. And I would like, that's fine. So, like, this is what we should call it. But I know that right now we're learning, so that's fine. And they would just be sort of weirded out sometimes, because it was very comfortable. Like, there was one, when I first started teaching, we started reproduction. I just stand in front of the class. I'd just say, penis, vagina, and that's how, like, the first thing I said there in that class. And everyone was like, I was like, okay, now that we've heard those words, it's okay to say them. It's, let's get that comfort level there. Because a lot of kids, they've never learned correct terminology. They may have never had a conversation about that with their parents. And so when it's coming up within a class about reproduction, they're very uncomfortable. They don't know how to say it. They don't know what to express. And it's like, well, it's not a dirty thing. This is just what happens. So let's try to be real. Let's try to have this conversation with each other so it's not an uncomfortable topic to breach. And I always told kids, especially like that, I was like, here's the thing, guys. I would always put a basket. I was like, if you have any questions, I was like, even if they're not directly, they're related to sex or something else here, put the note in the basket. You don't need to put your name on it. And I will go through and I will answer them. I'd give it days. Like, we'll just go through and I'll answer the questions that are out there, because I'd rather you guys have correct information. And there's always a kid who writes something weird, but oftentimes even their weirdest question, I would go and like spin it back to like, well, here's what we do, and so giving that just to give some good information out to them and say, hey, there we go. And it was always a day that it was probably the most awkward day for them. Like it never, like when the first year I did, it was really awkward for me, but after that, it was the first, like it was awkward for them, but like they always left like going, okay, that's a question I really didn't know. I didn't have anyone I could ask about it. I probably Googled it, but I don't, like having it explained this way made me more comfortable sort of anonymously knowing. So things like that were always good. I mean, it's one of those things you have to build up like to the character, the courage to do that in a class, but it's always one of those things where when it was done, I knew that like there's some information they got that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And so, which may make a real big difference down the road for them.
Are there any other things you can think of, like approaches or kind of like how you have the anonymous basket? I just assumed it was anonymous, but that make kids not as embarrassed to talk about that?
Yeah. So I think one of the parts, I think having the conversation, because I again, working with high school, so 14 through 18 years old, I think a lot of them, I think knowing who they were helped out a lot, because there were always some kids who I knew were real shy or embarrassed about something like that. And so I think part of when I would do, particularly the reproductive unit, was to identify things that were there that, and when we're having the conversations about like an assignment, try to get kids to get very comfortable with speaking about it, even though like it's like, so you have a kid who's like, you can tell is uber embarrassed and it's like, I don't want to say, it's like, okay. Then when I ask them the question is sometimes less about the content here, and it's more about just getting them to speak and knowing what they have to answer. So instead of like, my goal may not be, because it's all the time that there would be a student who maybe knew the content really well, but was going to be deathly afraid to say anything, up front. So it's like, okay, well here's, can you on the diagram, please, if I had to draw something like, okay, let's show, tell me what all the components are, like that you guys have drawn. They would have to go up there and say, and just like having them say, testicles or something like that, was like that experience by themselves got them more comfortable with having to say it and having to speak about it, which once they had to do it, then allowing them to write was a little bit easier. Another way, like with the anonymous basket, is if I had groups that were really shy, like if they're like 1 or 2 days in, I hadn't gotten anything noted in there, like I didn't have any slips, then what we would do is like at the end of the day, we'd be like, okay, everyone needs to go and write like everyone's getting a slip of paper, everyone needs to write a question. And everyone's putting a question in the basket right now. So, and by making everyone put it in, and not just like having someone try to drop it off on their own, then it's like, okay, everything's in here, and there were kids who wouldn't write anything, but like there was at least information that got in there. So like making everyone write, and most of the times you would say, hey, or you would bring up a particularly like interesting topic. So the other part I would look for is oftentimes like videos online or on YouTube that were about like reproductive, that were interesting. Like, so one of the things I always found was that if the video is 15 years older than every kid in the class, it looks dated, it looks timed, and it doesn't quite work. So finding something that maybe is a little more humorous, or maybe it's about a weird portion. There was a video we did at PDS about epigenetics that I would show, and they was like, oh look, like how your grandparents' things affected your mom, which has affected you, and how these things trigger. And they were like, that's really cool. We're finding little clips where there was something that they could sort of grab onto. And they would go, okay, but those were always done in our genetics before we got to reproduction. So then it was related back to, remember we talked about those cool things here? This is why they happen within the reproductive portion. So trying to pull things back together, and then I think the other part was just being being real with the students to the point where they were okay talking to you, and if they wanted to come after class and talk to you, but I mean, establishing that rapport with them, because the reality is they're young individuals, and sometimes they're not sure how you're going to treat them. If you treat them like, listen, you're in my class, then you're gone, I don't want to see you again, then that's how they respond to you.
Yeah.
So, but just having that, hey, no, I'm here. If you need something, come inside, you know. But I mean, that's being comfortable with, you know, who you are as a teacher and how you deal with your students. So.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, takes a while, but I know that, like in my classroom, it's like there's always granola bars, there's always water. If you need something, you let me know. I coached girls basketball, and so freshman girls basketball. And one of the things I always had in my gym bag was I had pads and tampons. And so I said, ladies, if you need something, all you need to do is go to coach's bag and get out what you need and go. This is not an embarrassment thing. This is what things are. And establishing that with 13, 14-year-old girls was really hard. But because I had done it in my class, I'd always say, like, ladies, you don't need to go to the nurse. If there's over here, like I had off to the side, there is a drawer that has things in there. If you need something, you don't need to ask. Just go and take the pass, go take care of your needs, and come back. So there's no reason for you to leave class. This isn't an embarrassment. I know that some male teachers have a real problem with that. They're like, oh, I'm like, it is what it is, you know. So
teaching biology.
Yeah, teaching biology. It's like, it does. But I mean, having that option for students was a real. It is, guys. It's okay. Here's the stuff. Let's be open and honest about it, and you know. And then just managing, because there's always a boy who's like, oh, I'm like, really, you know, jump on their case. But having those things, and so once they were comfortable with that, I figured that once a girl was comfortable to be like, I need to get something on the drawer. Like we're on an okay page. We'll have conversations. It'll be okay. So
cool. All right.